Where are people getting this information from? What's up, YouTube? So I've been getting a lot of comments and a lot of questions about things that I'm just baffled about. So I'll give you an example. So I had someone ask me how I can tell the gender of bearded dragons so early, and then they were like, "Why would you check them that early when they can change their gender throughout their life?" And I was just like, "What? What? No. Bearded dragon genders do not change after the reproductive system has been created within the egg. So as soon as they come out of the egg, you are able to check the gender of a bearded dragon. I will show you how. It's not that hard. The same way that you do it with any other bearded dragon with a flashlight. It's called the flashlight test. Everyone knows about it. All you do is use a flashlight, shine it through the base of the tail, and if there's two red lines or if two red dots, it's a male. If there's nothing, it's a female. Pretty simple. There's not much to it, but for some reason there's a lot of people out there that seem to think that bearded dragon genders change over time, over the course of their life, because of heat, because of UV, because of ratio of male to female bearded dragons. That's so incorrect. I have never heard something so crazy in my life. Just like any other animal on this planet, something is born with a reproductive system. They're going to have that reproductive system throughout their entire life. There's nothing we can do about it. Obviously, I know there's some animals out there that are asexual and can reproduce without the need of a mate. That's completely different. That's not what's happening here. So that's a bearded dragon. I don't know where people are getting this information. So this video is literally just busting myths about bearded dragons. Some crazy things that I've seen out there, some crazy things that I've heard, and just what I've experienced in the last, what has it been, 12, 13 years now? I don't even know how long it's been. I started when I was 16, and I'm 28 this year, so 12 years. So yeah, it's been a long time, and the things that I've seen are pretty normal compared to the things that I've heard, because they're just blowing my mind. They're baffling me like crazy. All right, so let's get into it. Obviously, I gave you one example. Bearded dragon genders do not change after the reproductive system has been created within the egg. That is not going to happen. That is just how they come out. Now, I do want to add to that if you are incubating bearded dragon eggs, there are things out there, and I'm not saying it's a myth. I'm not saying I've busted it, whatever it is. I'm just saying that if you incubate at certain levels of temperatures, that you are going to get more of one gender versus the other. What I've heard is that obviously you're supposed to incubate around 85 degrees for bearded dragons. So I've heard that if you incubate higher, it's going to be more males. If you incubate lower, it's going to be more females. I'm not sure how accurate that is. Now I'll give you my experience. I always incubate at 84, 85. So that's never, it's like, that's supposed to be the average. That's supposed to be like the perfect ratio of male to females. Now I've had clutches in the same incubation temperature. I've had clutches hatch with 4 females and 18 males, and that's just how it goes. That's just how sometimes it goes. And the temperatures didn't have a spike. The temperatures weren't too low, nothing like that. It was average 84, 85. And the same incubation period or incubation range, I have had female heavy clutches. So is that accurate? Not too sure. Now, obviously, in the incubator, you have high points and low points based off the gradient of the temperature. So if you don't have good air circulation in there, you could have higher temperatures at the top of the incubator and lower temperatures at the bottom of the incubator. So that could happen as well. It really just depends. But for me, these last few clutches that I've hatched, it's been about 40% females, about 60% males. So with that said, if you are ever planning on breeding bearded dragons, make sure that your thermostat probe is inside of an egg container. Do not put the thermostat probe outside of the egg container. If you open up the incubator, you're letting cold air in, and that probe is going to think that it's colder or cooler, and it's going to turn on and it's going to heat up after you close it up. So with that said, put that thermostat probe in the egg container so you don't have that issue. So that's where I do it. That's why I don't think there's an issue. It doesn't fluctuate enough for it to kick on when I open it. So if you have the thermostat probe inside of a container, it shouldn't kick on and off just because you open it. So that's just a little tidbit, FYI for you if you're planning on breeding. Some other myths that I've heard about bearded dragons. Once a bearded dragon gets to a certain age, they no longer need that protein intake that you are supposed to give them. Now, this is what I think. The myth that I've heard out there is that you're always supposed to feed your bearded dragons protein. Everyone has their own situation. Everyone has their own things that they like to do, all their own information that they like to spew out. For me, once my bearded dragons get to about 400 grams, I slow down the protein intake almost to zero. Now, when a female bearded dragon is breeding, I will give her pinkies and I will give her roaches and everything, obviously to bulk her up back up to regular weight. But other than that, I usually don't give my bearded dragons protein like most people do. Now, my bearded dragons, once they get to that 400 gram mark, I will feed them 5 to 10 bugs a week, and that's it. No more. Why do I cut it down so much? It really just depends. There's different reasons out there. For me, it's mainly obesity. I want my bearded dragons to live a long, healthy life. I don't want them to get obese. Have you ever seen an obese bearded dragon? Probably, yes, you probably have. There's a lot of them out there. An obese bearded dragon, someone's going to tell you, oh, I have a German giant. Oh, I have a bearded dragon that weighs 700 grams, whatever. That's obese. Most bearded dragons aren't supposed to get to that size. Now, I've had some bearded dragons that are like 23, 24 inches. That's still not a German giant. German giants get up to 3 feet. So if you think you have a German giant, if it's not closer to 3 feet, it's not a German giant. They don't really exist anymore. That's another myth that's coming to you here in a second. But yeah, bearded dragons don't need that protein intake like you think they do. What I've seen from people that consistently feed their bearded dragons protein throughout their entire life, 3 or 4 times a week, which is a lot of protein in my opinion for a bearded dragon. I mean, they're not moving around that much. They don't need as much protein anymore because they're not growing that much. So what you're causing is a lot of liver issues, a lot of organ failure, gout. There's gout in bearded dragons. Obviously, obesity. Those are things that you will need to watch out. Those are things that you want to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, another thing that I usually tell people is you got to watch out for parasites. So parasites are most likely going to increase whenever you feed bugs. So if you reduce the number of bugs that you're feeding your bearded dragons, the less likely they're going to get parasites. Now, obviously, parasites can increase from other things like stress levels and stuff like that. That's different. But usually, when you include bugs in their diet, you can also increase the level of parasites. So that's just another reason for me. I also deworm my bearded dragons every 6 months. So I deworm them after brumation and I deworm them before brumation. So every 6 months or so, it's when I deworm my bearded dragons or when I see that somebody has running poop. Now, obviously, running poop is not always a sign of parasites, but most likely if it's consistent running poop, it is a sign of parasites. So that's just another thing you got to look out for. The next myth that I want to bust is German giants. German giants used to exist not that long ago, actually. I mean, it was probably like 15 years ago, I think, is the last German giant that I've ever heard of that was alive, that was well and kicking. And, you know, German giants are one of those things where people are like, oh, you know, this bearded dragon is so big, so heavy, it has to be a German giant. As I've already mentioned, German giants got up to 3 feet almost. So if you do not have a bearded dragon that's over the 30 inches, it's probably not a German giant. Now, if you have a bearded dragon that is probably over 24 inches, then it might have some German giant lines in it, but it's not a German giant. Now, bearded dragons on average get anywhere from 18 to 23 inches. That's what I've noticed. That's what I've seen. 18-inch bearded dragons are pretty petite. So when you feed your bearded dragon, I'm just going to go back to that a little bit too. When you feed your bearded dragons, you also going to make sure that you're feeding based off the growth of the bearded dragon. If your bearded dragon is not 24 inches long, you don't need to feed it that much. If your bearded dragon is 18 inches long, it doesn't need to eat the same amount as a 24-inch bearded dragon. So that's just, I mean, that's given. That's normal. Just like with humans. A person that is 6 feet tall and working out every day needs to eat more than a person that's 5'5" and doesn't work out. Obviously, they don't need to eat the same amounts. So that's the same thing with a bearded dragon. One that's bigger than the other, one that does more activity than the other, doesn't need to eat as much. So that's just, you take that however you want to take that. That's just my opinion. That's my experience. My bearded dragons stay pretty lean. I've never had a bearded dragon die from obesity. I've never had a bearded dragon die from organ failure, nothing like that. That's just how I feed my bearded dragons. And my bearded dragons usually get to full grown by year 2, which is usually when they're supposed to. And then after year 2, it's mainly bulking up. So For me, my bearded dragons get to about 300, 350 grams by year 2, because I don't feed them a crap ton like most people do. Most people are wanting their bearded dragons to be full grown by 6 months. That's outrageous. Bearded dragons aren't supposed to be full grown by 18 months to 2 years. So for you to have a bearded dragon that's 400 grams by 6 months, that bearded dragon's gonna die. That bearded dragon's gonna live 7 years tops, and it's not gonna live that long. It's gonna have issues with its organs. It's gonna have issues with its. I mean, this is gonna be bad. Don't feed your bearded dragons that much. It's not good. Not good at all. At all. I'm telling you. If you're feeding that your bearded dragon that much, I hope you are prepared to have a bearded dragon die rather quickly. Bearded dragons can live up to 15 years. Why would you want yours to die at 7? I mean, that's ridiculous. That's dumb. I'm sorry, that's dumb. That's like having a kid and expecting it to die at 35. No, you want your kid to live to 70, 80 years old. Obviously, you're not going to be alive anymore, but you want your kid to have a full life. Same thing for your bearded dragons. Why would you want your bearded dragons to die so young just because you want it to be a German giant? Or you want it to be full grown by 6 months? No, dude, that's dumb. Don't do that. I'm sorry I got a little ranty. That's just one of the things that I really, really advocate is people overfeeding their bearded dragons. And then for breeders will label a bearded dragon that doesn't grow full grown by 6 months or a year as pet only. What the heck, dude? That is not a pet only bearded dragon. That is a normal bearded dragon. That bearded dragon is telling you that it doesn't want to eat that much because it doesn't want to die at year 7. It's telling you that it wants to have a full 15 years of life. Man, come on, people. We got to do better. I know these are just reptiles, whatever you want to think. It's not a dog. I know people out there like, oh, it's not a dog. Why does it matter? These are animals. These are living organisms. These things have heartbeats. These things have emotions. They have feelings. Why would you want them to die at 7 years instead of 15? Gosh. Sorry, y'all. I know I got a little mad there. I got a little ranty. My bearded dragons are all staring at me like, this guy's black bearded. Oh, yeah, I am. It's happening. Look, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, got a little ranty there over the feeding thing. I know, it really irks me. I've just seen it a lot. I've seen it, oh, my bearded dragon's supposed to be full grown by 6 months. Dude, you're going to kill your bearded dragon. And, you know, the thing is, bearded dragons will eat as much as they want to eat. So, sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes if you feed them more than you're supposed to feed them, I count out my bugs. I'm sorry, I do. I'm not the type of person to just throw bugs in there and let them go crazy. I count them out. I want them to have a certain amount of bugs. I want them to get a certain amount of intake every day or every 2 days or once a week, depending on what level they are. My babies get fed. I don't even count those. I'm not gonna lie. The baby bearded dragons, I throw bugs in there. I just go away because bearded dragons, when they're babies like that, they can eat 100 bugs a day if they wanted to. Especially when you have so many in a tub like that, you just go crazy. I mean, I probably buy like, I don't know, $100 worth of smalls every week, and that was when I only had 4 clutches. Now I have 6 clutches, so I'm probably looking at going to be like $200 a week now, but that's fine. It's for their health. I don't buy crickets, so if people are probably like wondering like, how do you spend $200 on crickets? Nah, it's dubia roaches, man, not crickets. I don't like crickets. Sorry, I don't. All right. Another myth that I've seen out there, and I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable with this myth because I have seen it. I have done this for several years, is cohabitating. Now, there's people out there that cohabitate their male and female bearded dragons. I'm not saying do that. If you want to do that, obviously that's at your own risk. I'm not telling you to do that. Most people will tell you not to do that. Most people would definitely advise against always having your male bearded dragon with your female bearded dragons, because your bearded dragons are going to have a cool off period for obviously breeding. So if you're always having your male in there, they're always going to be producing eggs, and that's how people get their females to lay 6 clutches, 9 clutches a year, is because their male's always in there, and that's it. And then during brumation, obviously they're all sleeping, so that's technically their cool off period, but I think they need more cool off than that. So for me, I don't keep my males with my females. I mean, that's obviously what most people do. I will repair my males if the female only laid 1 clutch. I will repair my males if she laid a 2nd clutch and it was infertile. Now, if they laid a 2nd clutch and it was fertile, I won't repair my males, because if she's done, she's done. I'm not going to make her go through it again. That's it. She's done. I have to get her up to weight. I have to make sure she's good before she brumates. So that's just how I do it. Now, all right, cohabitating. I do cohab my female bearded dragons. I don't cohab all my female bearded dragons. There are some female bearded dragons that I have that do not like other dragons. That's okay. The ones that do, I cohab. No big deal. I have some female bearded dragons that all they need is, I don't know, a couple days. And they're like, all right, this is fine. She's not going to do anything to me. I'm just trying to show my dominance, and that's fine. The only thing you have to watch out when you do cohab female bearded dragons is make sure they're all eating. Make sure they're both pooping fine, because sometimes when you add another bearded dragon in there, it stresses them out, and then they start pooping weird, and then the parasites take over. And then you also want to make sure they're not fighting, because let's say you're not watching your bearded dragons all day, because most people aren't going to sit there and watch your bearded dragons 24 hours. You got to make sure they're at least not fighting. So check for signs of biting on their tails or bite marks on their neck, because that's the things that will happen when a female bearded dragon is trying to show dominance to another female bearded dragon. They will fight. It's okay sometimes. You just got to make sure it doesn't get crazy. Most bearded dragons out in the wild, when they see another bearded dragon, that's just what happens. So right now I have two female bearded dragons. One got on top and the other one's like, nope, I don't like you being on there, and it got out of the way. So that happens. Nobody's showing dominance. Nobody's getting angry. It was just this one was trying to get closer to the basking spot, and that's fine. Now, obviously, when one gets on top of the other on a basking platform, that is an issue, because obviously the other one could be like, oh, you're trying to show dominance. That could be a case where you would have to add several basking platforms. Now, the last myth I want to bust is enclosure size. Everyone says enclosures need to be 4x2x2 minimum. I would agree. If you have the space, if you have the room, go for a 4x2x2 minimum. If you don't have as much space, let's say you're trying to put it on top of a chest, let's say you're trying to put it on top of a dresser or something like that, you can go and get away with a 3-foot wide enclosure, 2 feet deep, 18 inches tall. Obviously, it's up to you, whatever you have room for. If you have a bearded dragon that only sleeps in its enclosure, you open it up and it roams your house all day, it doesn't matter what size enclosure you have. They're only sleeping in it. That is crazy that people are like, oh, 4x2x2. Great. I'm glad that you can afford that enclosure. I'm glad that you have enough room for that enclosure. That's fine. Most other people do not. So for you to tell them that they have to have a 4x2x2 minimum, that's going to deter people away from owning bearded dragons. Why would you do that? Bearded dragons are awesome. Everyone should have at least one bearded dragon in their reptile collection. That's my opinion. So for you to say 4x2x2 minimum, that's crazy. You can get away with a 3-foot wide enclosure. That's 24 inches deep. As long as the bearded dragon can sit in their enclosure long ways without any issues, they don't touch tip to tip, they can live in that enclosure. Now, the reason you would want to go 4 feet wide, now I'm not saying you don't need a 4-foot wide enclosure. Sometimes you do. It really also depends on the heat gradient, how big your heat bulb is. Do you have a mesh top? All of these things will add into if you need a 4x2x2 enclosure or a 4-foot wide enclosure overall. So I've always said this. If you have a mesh top enclosure, your heat gradient, you don't have one. Your mesh top enclosure, all the heat's leaving up the top. There is no heat gradient. So if you have a mesh top enclosure, I don't necessarily think it matters to have a 4-foot wide enclosure, because there's not going to be a heat shield inside of that enclosure causing the entire whole enclosure to get warm. That's not going to happen in a open top enclosure, okay? That's just not going to happen. Now, if your enclosure is fully enclosed, then you should probably go with a 4-foot wide enclosure, or try to figure out a way that it would work for you to use a 3-foot wide enclosure where the heat bulb doesn't cause the other side, the cool side of the enclosure, to get above 75 degrees. It may be going for a smaller wattage enclosure. It may be, I don't know. Who knows what your situation could be. It could be that your room stays at 75 for some reason, and that also makes your enclosure stay hotter. That could be a thing where you would just go for a 4-foot wide enclosure so you could have that heat gradient where the cool side is at that 75. If your room is around 65 degrees, that 3-foot enclosure, you probably won't have a problem because under the basking platform, it's still going to be that temperature that you want. But on the cool side, because the outside of your enclosure is 65, the heat gradient isn't going to be as bad because you're still going to have that outside of the enclosure 65, so inside's probably going to be 70 degrees, 75 degrees. So you're not going to have that issue. But if your enclosure is getting to about 80 degrees on the cool side, then you probably need a wider enclosure. That's obviously going to be something that you have to figure out on your own. So those are the 5 myths that I kind of wanted to bust or kind of talk about. The last one you might be like, oh, well, the enclosure size isn't really a myth. It technically is, because people are like, oh, 4x2x2 minimum. So if that's the minimum, what's the maximum? Oh, there is no maximum. So you're telling me that I can have a 16 foot wide by 16 foot tall by 16 foot deep enclosure? You technically can. Your bearded dragon most likely is not going to use all of it. I'm not going to lie. Most likely it's not going to use all of it. When you feed it, your bearded dragon's probably going to lose its bugs, and you're probably going to be wasting your money. That's just how that's going to go if you have an enclosure that big. So technically there's end to both sides. There's a maximum and there's a minimum. So people are like, oh, go as big as you can. Yes, do that. Great for you. If you have, let's say, a colony of 20 female bearded dragons and you want to go 16 by 16 by 16, more power to you. Give them as natural as environment as you can. That's great. 16 by 16 by 16 is a lot of square footage, I'm not going to lie. 20 female bearded dragons is probably not going to take up that whole entire 16 by 16 by 16. That's fine. You're probably going to have a dominant female or a couple dominant females that are going to fight. But if you're giving them all that space, no big deal. So with that said, if you do have a cohabitating group of females, then go as big as you want. Go as big as you can. Because, at least from my opinion, this is my opinion only, at a minimum, a bearded dragon needs 6 square feet to live comfortably. That's just my opinion. If you go 8, they're more comfortable, I guess. So that's fine. Don't go too big, because then they're going to lose their food. They're going to utilize their entire enclosure. That's up to you. Obviously, this is just my opinion. Obviously, if you have outdoor enclosures, man, go crazy out there. I love outdoor enclosures. People with outdoor enclosures are like getting crapped on by other people. Oh, well, you shouldn't keep them outside because of predators. Or you shouldn't keep them outside because of weather. Or you shouldn't keep them outside because it gets too cold at night. Bearded dragons are from the desert. You know how cold it gets in the desert? You know that sometimes it rains in the desert and sometimes it doesn't ever rain in the desert? Bearded dragons are from that area. There are obviously some areas in Australia where it's not a desert. There's obviously some areas in Australia where it's a little bit more greenery, a little bit more wetlands. That's fine too. Wherever the bearded dragon decides to go, it's where the bearded dragon decides to go. If you have an outside enclosure, you're going to provide it all of that environment. You're going to provide it a wet area for it to swim in. You're going to provide it a shade area for it to hide under. You're going to provide all of this in an outdoor enclosure. You have even more space in an outdoor enclosure, so you're going to have no issue providing all of that. I know I got a little ranty in this video. I've just heard some crazy things, and I just want to clear them up for people because I don't want people to be deterred away from bearded dragons just because you hear crazy things online. Like, online is a great place to get information, but it's also a weird place to get information, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry there's so many people out there just saying whatever comes out their butt. And that's just how it goes sometimes. They like, oh, you know what? I think that's true. Let me tell the whole entire world. No, man, keep that to yourself. Keep that to yourself until somebody else researches it or you research it, and then you can tell everybody that information. That's just how it goes, man. So, with that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything that I put out in the future. And as always,